Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Results Loading podcast hosted by Prosperous AI. I'm your host, Michael Atkin, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by Mark Vierling, who has held various VP and CXO positions at the likes of American Woodmark, Amtrak, Oshkosh Corporation, as well as at GE, Kohler, and General Motors. You could say Mark has seen some things and had a bit of experience in the field thus far. So with that being said, Mark, welcome. Thanks so much for being on today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So, want to dive right into your background here. Your resume is off the charts in terms of how you've led the teams you've led and the companies that you've worked for. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've climbed the professional ladder thus far and ended up in the position you're at currently?
Yeah, I think for me, I started early, right out of college as a management consultant, which is kind of an interesting route coming right out of college that you get hired to go to the likes of General Motors as a consultant. I thought it was an interesting jump, but an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. I spent about 6 months in that role, working in the material end of the business and what they call the care end of the business, which is the end of line inspection and repair process. And I did some project work for them. At the end of the project, they offered me a role, and I chose to take that. So that's really how I got in. It was kind of a fluke opportunity, but sometimes it's lightning in a bottle that gets you where you need to be. So I started there in 1997, and I started with a team of 27 hourly folks. I was on the floor leading the United Auto Workers Local 95 group, and I had 26 employees that had a date of birth before my date of, or excuse me, a date of hire before my date of birth. So you learn very quickly in how to work interpersonally. And along those lines, you have to understand the local contracts and the union relationship as well. So, that was kind of the kickoff for me. I actually had gone to school to be a professional pilot. So to end up in the supply chain end of the business with General Motors wasn't really the plan.
Sure. And so from a human standpoint, why do you think you were able to hop into a position right out of college that's so unheard of today in, the current job market for a college kid, unless, they come out with like a PhD or something like that to go in and take on a team of nearly 30. I mean, what separated you from the rest of the pack that a company like GM was able to throw you in and just assume that you were going to be successful in that position?
Well, I think for me, the approach that I took starting with the consultant role was not having all the answers and being willing to learn and being willing to understand the business and hear the voice of your customer and hear the voice of your coworkers and hear the voice of the teams that you're leading. Because by and large, if you're not connected and communicating in that aspect, you're not going to be successful.
Absolutely. And that instinct that you just seem to naturally have, where do you think that came from?
For me, I've been fortunate throughout my life to be in leadership roles. I started, I worked in pizza places and restaurant type of environments, and had the opportunity in leadership roles even at a young age. I had been captain of the high school baseball team. Just leadership, I think, comes to people at times, and there's just an innate sense of being a leader, and I think I have that.
Yeah, your bread and butter, if you will. Real quick, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You initially were going to school to become a pilot. How did you transition from flight school to supply chain all of a sudden? If you're able to tell us the backstory there.
Yeah, so I had actually worked my way through college. I grew up in Pittsburgh, right by the airport, and the dream was to be a pilot. And in order to pay for college, I was working in the air freight industry, and I was working in local warehouses and driving forklifts. And I worked in a steel processing plant where we did some international shipments. And for me, the fact of the matter is that I kind of paid my way through college in the supply chain end of the business. And when the aviation aspect didn't pan out for me, those skills that I had attained over the course of working my way through school were applied at those first couple of roles I had.
Yeah, so basically a little bit of fate kind of pushed you to where you ended up, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it was really exactly that.
And interesting. So, Mark, given how many like CXO, VP positions you've held at several Fortune 500 companies, some of these roles being many individuals' dream jobs, you could say, or you could argue, I've always wondered what separated you from the rest as you climbed that corporate ladder. What was that corporate ladder? I'm sorry. What was the reason you became so qualified throughout your career versus some of your peers, for example, who are your equals, and then you kind of started skyrocketing or catapulting up the corporate ladder? What separated you from them, would you say?
I think the willingness to do anything that you're asked as you're early in your career is a differentiator. There's a lot of folks that I worked with early in my career that felt, they would put in the extra effort once they got to the role that they felt they needed to put the extra effort in on. And I felt the opposite, right? I think you have to put in that extra effort and put in the extra hours and become that subject matter expert before you have the role to be considered for the role. And, for me, there was a lot of double shifts at GM. There was a lot of spending time picking the brains of the guys that had been there for 20 and 25 years. So from that standpoint, it's you just never say no, and you can go a long way just on that.
Sure. And would you say, given your current understanding of the landscape of the professional world today, do you think that those values still stand true? I mean, are you seeing those kinds of behaviors out of the current generation trying to climb up the same ladder you did?
I think that it still remains a differentiator. The willingness to go the extra mile, the willingness to be there longer than anybody else and put in more work than anybody else is it's not as prominent as it used to be, and therefore it becomes a much greater differentiator.
Sure. And so I know you mentioned never saying no and being willing to always work the double shift and just be the yes man. Are there any other decisions that you can think of you made early on that helped kind of catapult your career to the next level that allowed you to become a decision maker in your professional career up until this point and beyond?
Yeah, I think that you have to continue to challenge yourself, right? I mean, I very easily could have stayed at General Motors for 25, 30, 35 years and retired out of there very comfortably. What I realized early on was that, I enjoy a challenge and I enjoy different aspects of learning. And, when I was at General Motors, it's a very robust, very mature supply chain and procurement organization. And change is not large scale change. There's nuance change, considering how well laid out it is and how well it is executed. I saw the opportunity when I left General Motors to join Kohler, to have the opportunity to kind of define and implement what good looked like. And it was at a time where Kohler was looking to really take supply chain and procurement from a cost of doing business into a core competency and something that they could provide an advantage to themselves with. And the ability to make wholesale change and design systems and design processes was something for me that was an incredible challenge and kind of put me outside my comfort zone from what I had learned at General Motors. But that thirst for knowledge is really what propelled me into that role. And I think that if you look at my path, that's really been, what is that next opportunity? What else can I learn? What other industries are there that present challenges above and beyond what I currently understand? And to take those opportunities when you see them is really what drove me to where I am.
Absolutely. So you coin yourself as a bit of a challenge hunter, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've been in roles that are turnarounds. I've been in fix-ups. I've been in a good state to better desire from an organization standpoint. So it really depends on the opportunity and how you think you can best deliver.
Sure. And so to kind of get things started for you, it sounds like that Kohler opportunity, you left GM to take on the Kohler role and you understood what challenges were going to be, at your fingertips once you went over to Kohler. Were those similar challenges not really available at GM? Did it seem like you had plateaued a little bit and you were looking for something new, or why the move to Kohler? I mean, was that just part of the Mark desires for new challenges, or talk to me about, why the move to Kohler? It sounds like it kind of got things going for you in terms of the professional that you are today. That initial leap from GM to Kohler, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was the opportunity to own kind of the end-to-end process, right? At GM, as I said, it's a very robust, very mature process, and change, while available, and it is not necessarily, grand scale. And for me,
Sure.
the opportunity to own my own business in that regard was something that appealed to me, and that's really what that jump. I had been actually offered the role and declined the role, and on the original scale. Back 6 months later, with the fact that they had added the Asian market to the role, and at that time, it's when I accepted it. So it really is a growth opportunity that I seek,
Sure.
if I'm making a change, and not necessarily growth in title, as much as it is growth in what I understand and what I can deliver.
Growth and knowledge as well, I would imagine. Yeah. So Mark, with that being said, in terms of supply chain, how different does the space look now? Is technology a main reason for kind of its new landscape? Would you say the supply chain and procurement space have changed dramatically since your initial days at Kohler, for example?
Yeah, I think technology plays a huge role in it, but I think there really is a cultural shift in the understanding of procurement and supply chain as well. Back in the late 90s when I started, it was really more about, make sure that I have the right part in the right place, right? And whatever you needed to do to pull out all the stops to make sure that the line kept running was really the crux of it. I think the evolution of it over the last 25 years or so, and just further accentuated by COVID, is that there's truly a science to procurement and supply chain. And what's unique about that is it's taken some pretty significant, impactful events to really get the business world understanding that it is a science and it's transferable, and it's applicable, as opposed to just make sure that you get me the right part at the right price from the right place and get it to me on time.
Right. And there's just so many more elements to it today. Obviously, we work in supply chain, and there's so many parameters, so many requirements now on the procurement and supply chain side that it seems like without technology, given the scope and the landscape of the market today, would be a disaster. I mean, I'm not quite familiar with what it looked like back in the early 90s and early 2000s and what have you, but I can tell you today, without technology, I mean, it would be a seriously heavy lift to manage every single thing, just given tens of thousands. Some companies are ordering, as you know, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of line items of raw materials and components and whatnot. It'd be almost impossible to manage without that technology aspect, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think the analytics and the business intelligence end of the business is just a fundamental game changer.
Well, and a requirement now as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And when I started, we really started digging into it when I was at Oshkosh, probably late in the fire and emergency role that I had in the 2013 to 2016. We really jumped into it at the Access Group in 2016, 2017, where it became pretty clear that we could be much smarter and much more nimble and agile if we had better information and had it at our fingertips, instead of spending the time to develop the information, but using the information based on technology to make decisions and make data-driven improvement.
And so did you always have access to that data-driven improvement and that business intelligence, even back at your days in Kohler, for example? Or when did that technological shift really come into play and start making a positive impact on the way you were conducting your job?
I'd say probably in the early, 2010, 2015 range is really when it became prominent. I mean, a lot of what we were doing in the early days of my career was manual and clunky in terms of even the technology that was available. It wasn't nearly what we have in today's day and age. And there was a lot more time in understanding and trying to mine the details in the data. And it really took away from the opportunity to use the data to figure out the right things to do for the business. The speed of the technology and the availability of data is just so much faster and greater nowadays that you can really just change the game and do things so much more quickly and more intelligently That's what really makes it exciting. But the technology, the evolution of analytics and business intelligence, at least from my experience, has probably been in the last 15 years.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, as you know, I mean, data today is as valuable as gold, especially in the world we live in. But you'd be surprised. A lot of customers that I talk to are resistant towards technology and help using technology to manage their supply chain, their procurement. I mean, some companies haven't changed their process in 60 years and they're still fine placing purchase order or placing orders over the phone and taking, supply chain, managing their supply chain by hand on in Excel or even manually on a sheet of paper. So, it's a diverse world out there. Some companies don't want, they're still resistant. They don't want to use the technology. They're comfortable in their own ways, but part of my job is helping them realize technology, even if you're tech savvy or not, can make a big difference in the outcome of your business. Something that I'm sure you've dealt with as well.
Yeah, I mean, just change of version in general, not necessarily just the data, but change in that methodology of, well, we've always done it this way can be a significant hurdle. I've run into that in various stages of my career where the organization is very comfortable with the way things are done, and not really looking to do things any differently. I think that at times you can find companies that believe they're on the cusp of transformation, and they really are focused more on optimizing what they currently do and thinking that's transformation. So there's an educational aspect to that, and that's part of the science and the evolution over the last 20 years or so. Is really there's still a lot of education at the leadership level of what good, solid procurement and supply chain looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's an intimidation factor with all the tools and, of course, technology. Again, we keep going back to that theme of what's out there and what's available. And I think there's an overwhelming aspect to that, and that creates a little bit of the resistance towards that the leadership, that we see from leadership teams too, in terms of utilizing the tools available to them to really optimize their procurement and supply chain processes, because some of these tools out there are fantastic. I mean, can take a process that takes them 6 weeks to do and turn it into a few minutes. And I think that's intimidating for companies that have been doing the same thing for 50 years. That's like a huge leap for them, and not sure they'd be able to handle a change like that internally.
I think some of that's the talent development aspect of it, and the willingness to go out and be open to appreciating what you don't know, and finding folks that understand that next big thing, if you will, or that next technology that can change the game, and being willing to put the right people in the right places and really continue to move forward with the times, as opposed to resting on, we've done really well doing it this way.
Traditional methods, exactly. And with that being said, Mark, can you share a significant mistake you made early on during your professional come up, and what came of it? What comes to mind, and what was the outcome of that mistake that you may have made?
Well, I think that for me, I don't really look at mistakes as much as I look at them as opportunities, right? And
sure,
I've had, there's day-to-day operational things from a General Motors standpoint, and through Kohler and through GE, that you make decisions that you think are good for the business that you find out very quickly are not, and you have to be willing at that point to kind of tuck your tail and say, okay, well, that didn't work. What's next, or how do we resolve that? And that can be, whether it be, structure changes in organizations, all the way down to, the flow of material on a plant floor. If you think you've got an idea and you put it in place and you think it's going to work and it doesn't, you have to be humble enough to say, well, I thought that was going to be great and it really wasn't. And as a result, we got to do something else, right? So, I mean, I think that anybody that I worked for a gentleman back in the day who said, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. So, I don't look at things as failure. I look at things, well, that didn't really go the way we had thought. What's next?
Yeah, how can we assess the failure, or not the failure, but the mistake? Why didn't it work, and how are we going to do better next time, right?
Well, and sometimes it is. Sometimes it is exactly that, Mike. It's failure, right? I mean, you think something's going to go going to go east and it goes west, and you're like, wow, that was awful. We need to respond to that quickly, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's all part of growth and running a business. You're not going to get every single answer right, no matter how good your mentors are, no matter how smart of a businessman you think you are. You're not like your mentor said, if you're not making mistakes and failing every once in a while, you're not trying hard enough. And also, a lot of mentors will probably tell you it's good to fail because then you learn a lot from it. Ends up being, like you said, turning it into an opportunity, and it, ends up emerging on the other side a lot smarter than you were before you made the mistake, right?
Yeah, and I think the other part of that is that when you see, if you're in that position to make the decision, you have to be willing to admit that it wasn't the appropriate call, right? And if you're in a position where you're supporting the folks that are making those decisions, you'd be wise to understand what could or could not go well or not go well, and at that point in time, be able to provide an alternate path, if you will.
Certainly. And on the subject of mentorship, I know you just mentioned, you received an invaluable lesson from one of your mentors back in the day. If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. In general, though, what role has feedback, especially from mentors, played in shaping the direction of your career thus far?
It's as important as any aspect of learning that I've had over the course of my career, frankly. When I started at General Motors, on the floor, as I'd said, there was a gentleman who had been a supervisor on the floor for 40 years. And he and I struck a relationship very early in my career. And, the ability to go to someone and say, hey, why do we do this? Or why don't we do that? And, those type of things are just essential to growing within a business and understanding how things work. So I've always had those relationships, up until my most recent role. There's always those folks that you go to and you strike that relationship with that understand the business and are willing to help you understand it better. And frankly, they can be a sounding board as well. So, not only do I seek those type of relationships, I welcome those type of relationships from teams that I have and folks within the organizations I've been as well.
Absolutely. It's a great recipe for success. You can be that person for somebody, and you got to have somebody up the chain who can be that person for you too. I've experienced it myself, and only positive outcomes have come from it, just because, like you mentioned, the sounding board. Hey, what do you think about this? Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think this is worth a shot? Is it a terrible idea in general, and everything in between? Those conversations, especially in the business landscape, are really important in terms of working through problems and understanding better ways to optimize processes and, just be more successful in your role, right? It's really important. And I think mentorship is one of the things that has helped me in my career. And I think that's not very unique, obviously, as you can speak to.
Yeah, I think seeking that collaboration is important, right? I think that the ability to understand what you know and understand what you don't know and be respectful of both. And when you don't understand something or know something, you go find that person that can help you understand it or learn it.
Absolutely, Mark. Absolutely. And last question here for you. Where do you see the sourcing, procurement, supply chain industry headed in the next 5 to 10 years? How important do you think technology and AI's role are going to be on its impact? And where do you think we're going to be standing here in maybe 2035?
For me, I think it's going to be data driven. I think you're going to see that continued expansion of technology and the application of it. What I'm hoping, and I've shared this with colleagues, is that there was such a rush to become supply chain experts throughout COVID because of the impact that it was having on the global economy and businesses in general, that it became that centerpiece of discussion. And how are we going to be resilient? And how are we going to be agile? And what are alternate paths of supply look like? And how do we model supply and demand differently? I'm hoping that the fever that was around that does not fade, if you will. And I think that it's allowed the application of investment towards technology, the expansion of the application of technology throughout industry. And I think that at the end of the day, it's going to do a couple of things. It's going to speed up business. It's going to mitigate risk. And at the same time, it's going to really require an entirely different talent pool to continue to drive that level of data-driven approach to business. And I do think that automation is another aspect of procurement that is kind of early phases, right? I mean, when we were at Amtrak, we automated about 95% of our small spend, if you will, and really drove efficiency into the supply chain and the procurement sides of the business. With that, I do think automation is going to play a huge role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the rise of AI, it's going to be all AI on the automation aspect for sure. One question for you. When you say role changes, what do you mean by that? When the people involved in supply chain, the roles will be different. Can you speak a little bit further to what you mean by that one?
I do think that some of the entry level aspects of procurement and supply chain will suffer in terms of opportunity because of technology and because of the data driven approach and automation. Right. And I think that that's where that role change is going to be. I think the folks that understand the technology and understand the development and application of the technology are going to be as important as the folks that are actually doing the work at kind of those entry level and mid level roles at times.
Absolutely, Mark. Well, hey, really appreciate your insight. Really appreciate you being here on the Results Loading podcast today. Is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap up today?
No, just thank you for the time and the opportunity. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well, Mark. Thanks so much. I always love getting the insight from a professional and in your specific industry. And again, thanks so much for the insight and really appreciate the conversation today. I'm looking forward to chatting soon and good luck to you.
Yeah, thank you as well, Mike. Look forward to speaking again.
Thanks again. Bye, Mark.
Bye.